After watching these stories, don't forget to write what you would have done in the main character's place. Now, let's move on to the stories. Darkness descended on the small town, and the gas station at the edge of the road looked particularly lonely. Only the old neon sign glowed red, reflecting lights on the wet asphalt. Neil, a young gas station attendant, sighed as he glanced at the clock. It was about 2 a.m., and despite having worked here for a few months, the night shifts still felt tough for him. Only 3 hours until closing, Neil thought, trying to find comfort in thoughts of a warm bed. Usually, it was quiet at night, and he tried to find ways to pass the time, reading books or watching old horror movies on his phone. But something felt different that night, whether it was the wind howling outside or an inexplicable feeling of anxiety gripping him. He couldn't tell. Suddenly, he heard a sound that caught his attention, the doorbell. Neil looked up, trying to figure out who could be at this hour. At the doorstep stood a strange man, his face shadowed by a hood, and his arms covered to the elbows. For a moment, Neil felt a dryness in his throat, but he composed himself. "Hello, what do you need?" Neil asked, trying to make his voice sound confident. "Fill up the car," the man replied, his voice cold as the night itself. He pointed to his vehicle, an old minivan parked by the pump. Neil couldn't help but notice that there was a child inside, whose head barely peeked over the seat. Neil felt something unpleasant but couldn't pinpoint what was causing this reaction. Neil slowly walked out of the gas station and approached the vehicle. The unpleasant feeling only intensified as he noticed the child in the back seat reaching out, trying to get attention. Her eyes were wide and scared, but she didn't say anything. "Is everything okay?" Neil asked, trying not to panic. The man, ignoring the question, focused on the fuel pump. Neil positioned himself behind the pump and started filling up the car. During this, he glanced at the child again, who hid again as her father turned away. Neil felt something tighten in his gut. He noticed a small tattoo on the man's arm that looked suspicious. "Do you need anything else?" Neil asked, trying to be polite. "No, that will be enough," the man replied, crossing his arms as if hiding something. Neil finished pumping gas, and as he turned to fill out the receipt, a thought crept into his mind. What if this man isn't who he seems? The anxiety grew as Neil noticed the child trying to get his attention again. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but the man abruptly turned to her, and she fell silent. That was the last straw. Neil began to think that this man might not just be an ordinary traveler but something much more dangerous. He noticed how the man nervously looked around, as if waiting for someone to notice them. With each passing second, Neil became more convinced that he had to do something before it was too late. "Can I help you?" Neil asked, trying to create the appearance of a normal conversation while his mind raced with thoughts of potential danger. The strange man looked at Neil with a slight smile, but there was no kindness in his eyes. "I can handle it," he replied coldly, and that's when something inside Neil snapped. He knew he had to act, but how? Neil, caught in an atmosphere of anxiety, continues to observe the strange man through the gas station window. He feels fear slowly enveloping him, yet he knows he must fulfill his duties. The man stands by his car, seemingly looking in the direction of the gas station. Neil averts his gaze, trying to focus on his work, but the sense of danger only intensifies. The horizon begins to darken, and the air fills with strange sounds. Neil hears someone calling outside, like a child. He approaches the window to get a better look and sees a little one in the car struggling with the seatbelt. The man watches the situation as if indifferent. Neil starts to panic. Should he intervene? Is it just the father's negligence? He weighs all the options until he hears the child crying. The decision is made. Neil decides to go outside to assess the situation. Feeling anxious, Neil approaches the vehicle and asks, "Is everything all right? Do you need help?" The man, who had previously looked strange, now appears even more threatening. He glances at Neil, and an undisguised aggression appears on his face. "Everything's fine," he replies, his voice tense. "The child just can't figure out the seatbelt." Neil continues to look at the child who is stuck and notices that there is not just one child in the car. Another child appears from the back seat, and Neil gets the feeling that something is wrong. The man's gaze becomes increasingly angry. "You shouldn't be here," he shouts sharply, and Neil feels his heart race. "Back off." Unpredictable twists in the situation begin to unfold as Neil realizes that the man is likely not the father of both children. Thoughts of kidnapping start to swirl in his mind. Neil quickly decides to call the police, discreetly reaching for his phone. At that moment, he hears the man stepping closer. "What are you doing?" he asks threateningly. Neil tries to appear calm, but fear overwhelms him. "I'm just checking to see if everything's alright," he replies, his voice trembling. "You'd better leave," the man says, his voice turning cold. "Otherwise, you'll find out what happens when someone doesn't follow the rules." Neil feels that the man intends to harm him, and his thoughts race. He decides that the only way to avoid danger is to quickly go back into the gas station and lock the doors. Neil swiftly heads for the gas station, feeling the man's eyes on him. He grabs the door, locking it behind him. His breathing becomes heavy as he hears footsteps outside. His heart pounds in his temples as anxiety builds. A sound from his phone confirms the call to the police, but as he waits, the situation becomes critical. The man bangs on the door, his voice harsh. "Open up. You won't like this." Neil watches the windows, thoughts racing through his mind. Will the police arrive in time? The situation grows more threatening as the man pulls something from his pocket. Neil sees a knife appear in his hands. At that moment, an uncontrollable fear grips Neil. He clutches his phone, preparing for any scenario. The man suddenly stops, and his expression changes. Hatred fills his eyes as he begins to blame Neil. "You're interfering. Don't meddle in things you don't understand." Neil realizes that the man is not just threatening him. He is not an ordinary criminal. Deep down, he senses that the man's goal is not only to intimidate but also to commit something horrific. The wind howls, and in the night's darkness, the sound of closing doors can be heard. Neil feels time slipping away, and he must decide whether to stay safely behind the door or risk it to save the children. Ultimately, as the door begins to buckle under pressure, he makes a decision. "I won't be silent anymore," Neil shouts, trying to find strength within himself. The final battle begins as Neil decides to confront the man to protect the children and himself. This decision leads to a climactic moment that will keep everyone on edge. Neil feels the adrenaline pounding in his temples. He decides that he won't let fear paralyze him. Gathering all his courage, he opens the door and jumps outside. His heart races, and each step is heavy, but he knows he must protect the children. Seeing Neil, the man shouts, "You're just a fool. You shouldn't interfere." Neil feels the man's harsh gaze piercing through him, but he doesn't back down. He begins to shout, "The police are on their way. Let the children go." The man, in agony and anger, approaches closer, gripping the knife in his hand. Neil can afford to be scared. He takes a few steps forward, trying to position himself between the man and the car. "You have no right to keep them here," Neil yells, trying to intimidate the man with his confidence. At that moment, fortunately, the car doors open, and the children, observing the situation, flee toward the gas station. Neil sees them heading for safety, but the man doesn't plan to give up. He lunges at Neil again, but Neil manages to dodge, landing a punch to the man's face. In response, the man tries to stab with the knife, but Neil deflects his arm to the side. The struggle becomes intense. Neil tries to stay calm and focused. The children, realizing what is happening, hide around the corner of the gas station while Neil fights for survival. He understands that if he doesn't stop this man, they will all be in danger. At the moment Neil starts thinking about how to escape, the man shouts, "You don't know who you're dealing with. I won't let anyone escape." Neil feels fear and anxiety rising again. But deep down, he realizes he can't back down. He understands that this is a fight not just for his life, but for the lives of the children. Suddenly, the police arrive on the scene. Blue lights start flashing, and the sounds of sirens grow louder. Neil feels a new wave of hope wash over him. He shouts toward the man, "Help is close. Let the children go." The man, noticing the police, initially hesitates but then, seeing that Neil won't stop, tries to flee. But Neil isn't about to let him go. He lunges forward, grabbing the man by the shoulders and trying to stop him. At that moment, the police get closer, and the officers draw their weapons. "Stop!" one of them shouts. With no way out, the man turns around, preparing to attack, but Neil tries to intervene, preventing the man from turning back toward the children. The police react instantly, and one of them jumps forward, blocking the man's escape. The police apprehend the man, and all the accumulated tension begins to dissipate. Neil feels his strength leaving him as one of the officers approaches him. "Are you okay?" the officer asks, looking closely at Neil. Neil nods, but his voice trembles as he replies, "I thought he was kidnapping the children. I couldn't just stand by. The children, who have been hiding around the corner, come out into the light, and one of them, a little boy, looks at Neil with gratitude. Neil smiles, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. His bravery was not in vain. The police interrogate Neil, and he recounts everything that happened. The officers quickly organize everything necessary to ensure the children's safety. The man is arrested, and it seems he will no longer pose a threat. After everything he's been through, Neil stands outside, looking at the small children he managed to save. He realizes that a true hero is not one who is unafraid but one who acts even when fear overwhelms him. Eventually, the sky begins to clear, and while the police handle the situation, Neil feels that his determination and courage have saved not only the children but also himself from inaction. He knows that in days when the world becomes darker, it is important to have the courage to shine his consciousness, even in the most difficult moments. Jameson and Louis are both 24 years old and work at a gas station located on the outskirts of town. They've been friends since their university days and have always worked together at this job. Although night shifts can often be boring, they manage to entertain each other with conversations and jokes. One dark night, when the moon was hidden behind the clouds, Jameson and Louis received another night shift. At first, everything went as usual. They filled cars with gas and discussed plans for the weekend. But suddenly, their peace was shattered. The first sign was the sudden power outage. Everything around them plunged into darkness. Louis grabbed a flashlight, and they began searching for the fuse box. It seemed like just a regular malfunction, but when the lights came back on, they saw strange symbols appearing on the gas station's windows. "Jameson, do you see that?" Louis asked, pointing at one of the windows. The symbols looked like vague shapes, as if someone had drawn on the glass. Their meaning was unclear, but they seemed to convey some sort of unsettling message. "Maybe it's just moisture," Jameson replied, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Soon after, the lights went out again, and this time their flashlight began to flicker uncontrollably. Jameson and Louis started to feel that something was off. "This is really starting to scare me," Louis said, gripping the flashlight tightly. "Maybe we should close the station for the night." But just as she said that, the flashlight suddenly turned off. They were left in absolute darkness, hearing only the sound of rain falling outside. "Louis, are you there?" Jameson asked, feeling panic set in. She replied quietly, "Yes, I'm here." Suddenly, they heard a crackling noise in the corner of the room. Jameson, though scared, resolutely approached the sound, hoping to discover what was happening. Louis stayed in place, holding the flashlight in her hands. "It's probably just something that fell," Jameson tried to reassure himself, although he didn't believe his own words. When he turned back to return to Louis, he saw her standing with a pale face, pointing at something behind him. "Jameson, look." He turned and saw new symbols appearing on the wall, but this time they glowed red. They exuded a sense of cold terror, as if they were alive and breathing. "This isn't normal," Jameson muttered, trying to find a way out of the situation. "Maybe it's just some prank from our friends." But deep down, he felt that there was something more than just a joke. Suddenly, the lights came back on, but instead of the familiar sight of the gas station, they saw something else. The symbols began to change, morphing into shapes that resembled people watching them. "We need to leave, Jameson," Louis screamed, but at that moment, the gas station's doors slammed shut as if someone was watching them. Jameson tried to open the doors, but they wouldn't budge. They had no choice but to watch as the symbols on the walls grew more aggressive and shadows began to dance across the walls, as if something was trying to break through them. They realized they could do nothing about this horror. The unknown surrounding them became more real, and their fear turned into panic. Jameson and Louis stood embraced, hoping this was just a nightmare and that everything would return to normal soon. But with each passing moment, they felt trapped, as the mystery of the gas station began to reveal its true faces. The shadows grew stronger, and the symbols became bolder. What was really happening at this gas station? Would they survive this night? Jameson and Louis stepped into the center of the gas station, where flickering signs created an aura that illuminated their faces. They stood before a wall that now resembled a portal, surrounded by symbols reminiscent of ancient runes. "What does it all mean?" Louis asked, her voice filled with excitement. "It's probably the key to our salvation," Jameson replied, studying the symbols. "If we can decipher them, maybe we can find a way out." The glowing signs began to change, forming phrases that Jameson tried to catch. In one of them, He saw the word truth. He turned to Louis. Maybe we need to understand what happened here to be freed. Suddenly, one of the symbols lit up brightly, and a shadow emerged from it, taking the form of a man. It was the gas station attendant, but his face was distorted, and his eyes radiated light. "Why are you here?" the attendant asked, his voice booming like thunder. "Are you ready to confront your fears?" "We're ready," Jameson said confidently. "We want to know the truth about this place." The attendant nodded and, pointing at the symbols, continued. "These signs reflect your experiences. Each of you has a personal secret that must be revealed. Only then can you escape this place." Louis, feeling anxious, asked, "What should we do?" The attendant smiled, and for a moment, his face appeared ordinary. "You need to return to your memories. Find what you fear the most. That is your key to exit." Jameson and Louis exchanged glances, realizing they faced a daunting task. "I'll try," Louis said, focusing. "I remember getting into an accident when I was a child. I was really scared of being in danger again. This might be related." She closed her eyes, and suddenly an image of a child riding a bike appeared on the wall, followed by the accident. Louis felt that fear again. But this time she didn't run away. She focused on reliving that moment. Seeing Louis concentrate, Jameson decided to try as well. He recalled the moment he lost a loved one in an accident. The fear that had overwhelmed him then returned. As their memories merged into one vision, the symbols on the wall began to glow even brighter. Louis and Jameson exchanged looks, and hope blossomed in them. "This is the memory that connects us," Jameson said. "We have to face it together." Finding courage within themselves, they both stepped forward, touching the symbols. They began to share their fears, their losses, their pain. Each word revealed a new symbol, and their hearts filled with lightness. Suddenly, the light in the gas station changed. The shadows began to recede, and the attendant smiled. "You did it. Now you know your truth, and it has become your shield." The symbol on the wall that was previously hidden opened up, revealing an exit. The doors led to light that beckoned them outside. "We can go," Louis exclaimed, feeling a surge of hope. Jameson took her hand and stepped forward. Together, they moved toward the light, feeling the shadows disappear and their fears left behind. As they exited the gas station, the light of a new day illuminated their faces. They smiled at each other, feeling that they had walked through fire and emerged unscathed. They turned back, and although the gas station remained behind, it was now just a memory of the fears they had overcome. Jameson and Louis knew they could always rely on each other and that even in the darkest times, a way to the light could be found. When Jameson and Louis stepped outside, the sun was already rising, dissipating the morning fog. They stood there smiling, feeling the weight that had been pulling them down finally lift away. "I can't believe we went through that," Louis said, looking at Jameson. "We really are stronger now." Jameson nodded. "Yes, but it's not just about facing fears. We've also discovered something important about ourselves and each other. Now we can move forward without looking back." They got into the car, with Jameson, as always, taking the driver's seat. Louis turned on the music, and rhythmic sounds filled the cabin, lifting their spirits. Their minds were occupied with new plans. They wanted to travel, visit new places, and explore new horizons. Suddenly, Jameson stopped at a traffic light, and his gaze fell on the gas station they had left behind. Shadows appeared on the windows, but now they didn't scare him. "You know," he said, "we could come back here to help others who might find themselves in the same situation. Maybe we could become counselors or learn something new." Louis smiled. "That's a great idea. We can use our experience to help others understand that fears can't stop us, they can only teach us." The light turned green, and Jameson drove forward. They were leaving behind not just the gas station but everything that had weighed them down. Each turn of the wheel on the road symbolized a new beginning. The road ahead was endless. And while they didn't yet know what adventures awaited them, Jameson and Louis knew one thing: together they could overcome any challenges. They set off on a new journey, filled with hope, new dreams, and faith in a better future. And this was just the beginning of their story. Cole, a 38-year-old owner of a small gas station on the outskirts of town, was used to quiet nights. He knew that the gas station opened for customers needing fuel and a quick snack, but this night was about to change everything. It all began when he received a phone call from a friend who worked in the police department. The friend informed him about a series of mysterious disappearances in the area. No one knew if it was connected to something sinister, but Cole decided to stay open just in case. After midnight, The gas station became quiet again. Cole sat at the counter, going through the logs when suddenly the lights began to flicker. He paused, listening to the sounds outside. Nothing unusual, just the wind and the rustling of trees. At that moment, a man walked in, looking disheveled and confused. His clothes were dirty, and he seemed to be struggling to catch his breath. "Do you have any water?" he asked, leaning over the counter. Cole handed him a bottle of water. Noticing the man's anxiety, he looked like he needed not just hydration but a safe haven. "You haven't seen anything strange, have you?" Cole asked, studying the man. "I've heard some weird things happening around here." The man shook his head, but suddenly his eyes widened in terror. "I heard someone calling. I couldn't sleep. I thought it was just my nerves." But Cole felt his heart race. He grabbed his phone to call the police, but at that moment, the lights went out completely. Darkness enveloped the gas station, and the air felt tense. Cole realized the gas station was not just a place, it was a trap. "Stay here," he said to the man. "I'll check what happened." Grabbing a flashlight, Cole stepped outside. His footsteps echoed on the pavement, and the night surrounded him with a chilling silence. He headed to the electrical panel, trying to figure out why the lights had gone out. As he reached the panel, he heard rustling behind him. Turning around, he saw a silhouette in the darkness moving closer. "Who's there?" Cole shouted, trying to keep his voice steady. The silhouette stopped but didn't respond. Cole realized this wasn't the man who had just entered. Fear gripped him as he quickly turned back to the gas station. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, and he saw that the man he had helped was no longer inside. Cole's heart raced as he realized he had left him alone. He rushed back inside, just as the gas station door creaked open. The darkness seemed to advance toward him. Cole remembered that he had a responsibility. Gathering all his courage, he shouted, "Listen, you can't stay here. You need to come back." But only the gust of wind responded to his calls. No one appeared, and an unsettling dread surrounded him. At that moment, he understood that the gas station was not merely a gas station, it was a place where fates intertwined, and something sinister wanted to take control. Determined not to let fear win, Cole began searching for the man throughout the property, trying to find out where he had gone. When he heard a sudden noise from the back of the station, he noticed flickering lights. As he approached, he discovered the man sitting on the floor, staring at strange symbols painted on the wall. They resembled markings Cole had seen in old books related to forgotten rituals. "What are you doing?" Cole asked, trying to stop the man. "I figured it out," the man replied, tension in his voice. "I have to complete this. These symbols are the key." Cole realized he was now standing on the edge of something grand and dangerous. He made a choice. "It doesn't matter what this is, but we need to find a way out together," he said. Gathering his resolve, Cole decided that, despite everything, he wouldn't abandon his companion. Perhaps they could end this together. They began searching for an escape, leaving behind the mysteries that should have never surfaced. If the night at the gas station taught them anything, it was that friendship and courage could overcome even the darkest shadows. As they navigated through the flickering lights and eerie sounds, they discovered a hidden door behind the gas pumps. It led down into a dark basement filled with strange artifacts and old machinery. The air was thick with dust and secrets. Cole felt a shiver run down his spine as they descended. "What is this place?" he whispered. The man looked around, eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. "I think this is where they conducted the rituals. We need to be careful." As they explored the basement, they found remnants of strange experiments, old notes, jars filled with unknown substances, and even a makeshift altar adorned with the same symbols they had seen earlier. The atmosphere was heavy, as if the very walls were alive with the energy of the past. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the basement, causing them to jump. The entrance door slammed shut, plunging them back into darkness. Panic set in. "Is this how it ends?" Cole thought, heart pounding, but the man, now looking more resolute, said, "No, we can't give up. We need to finish what we started. These symbols, they might protect us." Together, they began to trace the symbols on the wall with their fingers, feeling the vibrations resonate through their bodies. As they worked, a warm light began to glow around them, illuminating the space. The symbols pulsed in rhythm with their heartbeats, and the oppressive darkness started to recede. "This is it," Cole shouted, feeling a surge of hope. "We can do this." In that moment of unity, they completed the circle of symbols, and a brilliant light engulfed them. The basement trembled as if the very foundation of the gas station were shifting. Then, With a blinding flash, they found themselves back outside the gas station, safe and sound. The night air was still, the stars twinkling overhead as if nothing had happened. Cole looked at the man, who was equally astonished. "Did we just?" "I think we did," the man replied, breathing heavily. "But what does it mean?" As they stood there, a sense of calm washed over them. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. From that night on, Cole transformed the gas station into a community hub, sharing their story and encouraging others to confront their fears. The mysterious symbols became a source of inspiration, reminding everyone that unity and bravery could light even the darkest paths. And as for Cole and his newfound friend, they became inseparable, often laughing about the night that changed their lives forever, a night when they discovered that together, they could overcome anything.